Hello. As I said, I will do this experience of 4 hours exercise in a day. So I read something about Liszt one day in his biography. I read it actually many times in different biographies. I will put the text there on the video. Basically, he's saying it's in French. He was writing in French because his mother language was French and German. So basically, he's saying to a student, he's saying that he's working since 2 weeks like a crazy guy, doing 4 or 5 hours exercise a day, thirds, sixths, cadences, tremolo, octaves, this kind of stuff, and reading everything he has. So he's reading the Bible, Plato, Locke, I think Hugo, all the people he has there. And actually, I thought about reading some myself actually, but most of stuff he read I did. So in 1831, I'm translating from French, Paganini has done his first concert in Paris. Liszt was fascinated by the amazing violinist and wanted to become the Paganini of the piano. So he's writing to a friend, I'm working, my brain and my fingers are working now since 15 days like damned. He's reading Homer, so Iliad and Odyssey. I read this, the Bible, read this too, Plato, read this too, Locke, I don't know, I should check. Byron and Hugo, I read too, Lamartine too, Chateaubriand, I'm not sure. And then he's practicing Beethoven, Bach, Hummel, Mozart, Weber. So reading, I guess, sight reading, playing. They are all around him. He's studying, meditating, and discovering with fire. And on top of this, he's doing 4 to 5 hours exercise, thirds, sixth, octave, tremolos, repeated notes, cadences, etc. So there he was around 20. No, actually, he was exactly 20. This is the time he was in Paris. He lost his father some years before, so he was a bit lost and stopped playing concerts. And then after hearing Paganini, he actually got back to practicing and started then his famous concert career. So I will try this 4 hours exercise. So I just did 1 hour of Hanon. Actually, Hanon is just the exercise I'm doing since I'm a kid, so I know it. It takes me 65, I just did it, it takes me 65 minutes to do it. I started a bit not too fast in the beginning, as always, to warm up a bit. And I thought about trying other exercise. So I have 3 books of Liszt'S exercise that I did once. The number 1 I did a bit more, and then I got a bit stuck in the scales because he's doing scales in all directions or like this or 6 and so that's the difficulty with the scales in all directions. I discovered is the fingerings. Like, I'm used to do scales with up and down with an octave distance, or with a third I could do it too, but then once it becomes a 6 and it starts to go opposite movements, I get lost in fingerings, for example. So I thought it's interesting to just to be able to do all kind of fingerings in scales. Why not? And then his 2 other books are more heavy exercise, like for example jumps of a double octaves, both hands, and then with increasing distance or diminishing distances. But I also have Pishna. It's an exercise I did when I was a teenager. I did some of the beginning, so I will maybe explore this. And then I also have the Brahms exercise, which are a bit different kind of exercise. Brahms is more rhythmical or polyrhythmical exercises mostly. That actually is useful if you play Brahms, because he's doing this a lot in his music. So that's what I will experiment. I will do 2 hours today, 3 hours tomorrow, 4 hours the next day, and then I think I will stop the experiment because I have lessons and I cannot go really higher than this. But yeah, I'm sure it will be interesting. Looking forward. I'm done with the second day of doing exercise. I did 3 hours today. Actually, it passed faster than I thought. I realized one thing is doing exercise is more easy. The time goes by quicker than practicing, because practicing you have to focus more on difficult stuff, rhythm correct, like try different version, everything. Like exercise mostly there is, well, depends. I know, for example, the Hanno book, I know it, so I don't have to think so much about what I do. It's 1 hour that passed quite fast. Now I decided to try to do the Liszt'S exercise, these 3 books, see how long this takes. I have no idea. And there I have to think a bit more. Sometimes so exercise I have to think about how it works, which fingering, and I cannot do them also. It's a bit slower. I almost finished. I almost did the first book, and I needed 3 hours to finish the first book. So 1 hour yesterday, 2 hours today. It's interesting. Yeah, like what I like in the Liszt'S exercise actually is that he's always practicing in every tonality, so it makes you really be able to navigate on every tonality. Because when you do thirds or sixth, or when you do repeated notes, or he do silly stuff like a scale with 2 fingers, or with 2 and 3. So he's doing this kind of scales with 2 fingers or with a pair of fingers, and then you really have to think about, you have to know the tonality, you have to know which note you have to navigate, otherwise you just get lost. And that's a very good, and actually you don't have really time to think about the notes, but you have to feel them. Your hands have to feel on which note they should be. It's a very good exercise to know tonalities actually. And it's also a very good school of fingerings, because he's mostly suggesting more than one fingering. So for example, the scales in thirds, he's suggesting different options there. He even 2 options there. In one before, he even suggests 3 different options for the chromatic scales. For example, he suggests 1 2 1 2 1 2 3, or if it's just 1 3 1 3 1 2 3, or you have the 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 option. So it's different kind of options. So it's very interesting that in the Liszt'S exercise, it's not always technical exercise, physical. It's really a lot of intellectual stuff sometimes in this exercise. Or the scales, for example, he's doing different variation of scales, and there the main difficulty I have for the moment is the fingering. Actually, not really that's not, my fingers don't get tired doing this. It's more my brain thinking about the fingerings. So yeah, very interesting. But as I said, it's less difficult. I definitely feel my fingers goes faster. It's more easy. It's like I had a nice analogy. It's like when I go do bicycle, for example, and I put grease on my chain, the bicycle runs better, actually goes better. Now I could decide to keep it difficult because I want to sweat and be tired and do sport, but I can do this too with a better oiled bicycle. It would go faster, would be smoother, and I can, if I want to break a new record, my personal record, I can do it more easily. I can go to a next level. So I think it's the same on the piano. If you do exercise, you just can go to the next level. The mechanic is oiled, and everything works quicker and faster and easier, so you can focus more on music. Yeah, so let's see tomorrow 4 hours. So it's the third day of my experiment where I wanted to do 4 hours exercise like Liszt's was doing when he was 20. He did between 4 and 5. So Monday I did 2 hours. This was fine. Because actually the week before, 2 weeks before I was practicing, I was doing this experiment until 10 hours practicing. So I was, let's say, used to move my fingers. I was into the practice mode. 2 hours exercise was fine. Actually, I did 1 hour Hano and I did 1 hour Liszt's exercise, first book. And Tuesday I did 3 hours, and actually this went really fast because I remember at the end of the day I thought, oh, I still have to do some hours, and then I realized looking at my time, oh no, I did 3 hours actually. So this went faster, and again I did 1 hour Hano, I think. Yeah, I did 1 hour Hano and I did 2 hours of Liszt's exercises. So I finished the first book and I started the second book. And there I really didn't feel tired at all. My fingers were totally fine, and I rediscovered the first book of Liszt's exercise, so some of them I knew already. And actually the first book, it's really the first part with finger independence that's a bit difficult. The second part is more scales, where the fingering is difficult. Third and fourth scales, where also fingering is very difficult, and actually I actually skipped the finger he's suggesting. I tried a more simple fingering, and I think would be worth learning the exercise a bit better until I feel I can do the exercise and then try his fingering. Like I said before, it's an interesting thing in Liszt's exercise. He's suggesting many different fingerings because he thought about which kind of fingerings you could use in doing thirds scales. Now, why would you do third scales? Well, because just you solve a problem, right? Why would you do scales? Not because you will have a scale in a piece one day. Of course, it will help a bit, but it's just be able to do combination of fingerings and complicated stuff with your fingers, just to be able to do more. Now, you notice one thing I started to do is actually use a chair when I'm doing long hours, and I started to do this when I was doing this 10 hours experiment. When it's exercise, actually, just to have my back more relaxed, I can practice like this. I don't have to keep my back straight, and since it's nothing I have to put power like etudes or something, or heavy pieces, I can just practice like this and be relaxed here. So yeah, and then today, the third day where I should have done 4 hours, actually I got stuck, and I just stopped now. So I'm in the middle. Yeah, I'm in the middle of the second book of Liszt's. I did 1 hour Hano. I did it faster than last time. Maybe I shouldn't have done this. So I did what? I did 1 hour Hano, and I did again 2 hours of Liszt's, which was, I think, no, I finished the first book and I started the second book. Yeah, this took me 2 hours. So I'm not finished actually with Liszt's exercise. I'm surprised it's really long. Of course, I don't know them, so it needs a bit more time to discover them. The first, I did them only once through just to know how it's working. Yeah, so I thought I would do the Brahms exercise too and Pishna, but finally it took more time than I thought. And I stopped because I started to feel a bit tension in my hand, and it started to hurt a bit on different places. There was especially this difficult exercise here that I just finished, where is one place that I just don't manage. It's this one here. Is it this one? Yeah, this is one. So you have to. You keep 2 notes. You have a chord, 7 chord. So you keep a 7 chord, and then you keep 2 notes, and you play 3 of the other notes. And this one is really, you are fixing these 2 fingers and moving these 3 fingers. And there is even worse later. So this one actually are putting a lot of pressure, tension on the fingers and the tendons, and I guess that's why I get more exhausted in this book now, and I was less in the other one. But yeah, like so I wonder how Liszt did 4 or 5 hours. Well, he was a trained pianist and was very young. Of course, I'm 40. Liszt was 20. It would have been more easy when I was 20 because you get injured less quickly than when you're 40. You have to be more careful when you're my age, and even more the older you get. You have to warm up correctly. You have to try to really be relaxed, not push it. Every time you feel a tension, try to stop and leave it for a while and start later. Yeah, so exercise are interesting, and I thought, and finally it's interesting for another reason that I thought, because like I said in the first video, when you do exercise, it's like oiling a bicycle, right? You feel that everything goes faster and quicker and easier afterwards, after you do a lot of exercise, like Hanon, for example. That's more speed exercise and finger exercise. But then the whole Liszt exercise are actually a bit like Brahms, probably. There are sometimes more intellectual exercise. Actually, it's just combination of moving fingers that you don't think about, or fingerings that you have to think about, or physical problems you have to solve. And mostly it's you tell your fingers to do something and they're not doing it. So it's mostly intellectual in that way, I mean. And yeah, he's exploring every time. Yeah, and then all the tonalities. So every exercise, and that's actually really important, every exercise he's doing in the 3 books always goes through every tonality and suggesting different fingerings. And going every time through every tonality gives you with time this feeling of tonalities. So your hands feel tonalities. And then I just realized, well, Liszt was an improviser and a composer, and he probably composed by improvising most of the time, not always maybe. When you do this for, let's say I would do this for months, I would feel so relaxed being in every tonality that I probably would be able to improvise, because you did all kind of combination of notes on every tonality. So you get really familiar with tonalities. You know exactly where to place your finger and play in all directions with these notes of the tonality. So I just felt it gets very close to be able to improvise in the tonality, to just fool around and keep this tonality, and then move to each other you want, because you practice them all, right? So I realized that's probably a training that Liszt did as a kid or as a teenager or later, and that's how he became such an improviser and such a composer, because yeah, like he also apparently was able to transpose all Bach prelude and fugue in any tonality on demand. So this was probably the same kind of exercise than this, just be able to play with tonalities in all directions. So what I realized is this, like it's more intellectual than I thought, and that's important actually. And it's actually a good preparation to freedom on the keyboard. So it's like technical freedom, but also improvisation freedom, and just feel free with tonalities and with music at the end, right? So yeah, I hope I brought you some ideas. Always, like, for everyone who wants to try this exercise, even practicing many hours, try little, try a bit first, be progressive, add every day a bit, not too much. Try to be careful and attentive when you feel tension, or when you feel some strange feelings, when it starts to hurt, and then stop. Do breaks, or stop and start next day. If you feel it's always hurting, start for a week and start over a week later. Because if you get injured, you can be stuck by not being able to play for weeks, for months, and the injury comes quickly every time you go back to practicing, so that can be annoying. Some people even had serious injuries and could not play anymore by doing this kind of stuff, or by pushing it too much. So be careful, do it progressive. Yeah, I hope you learned something from the video. Thank you. See you for the next experiment.